Hello, you're listening to a webinar recording brought to you by Nonprofit HR. My name is Atoka Ashman Brew, and I am Managing Director for Client Marketing for Nonprofit HR. Today, you're going to hear about the 2021 Nonprofit Talent Management Priorities Survey Overview results. Today's presenter is Nonprofit HR's CEO and founder, Lisa Brown Alexander. Lisa's leadership and the work of the firm have proven that better talent management practices can play an integral role in nonprofit success. Nonprofits have benefited from her wealth of knowledge and experience to make their people-driven practices and initiatives successful. Lisa's goal is to ensure that every nonprofit HR engagement inspires social sector leaders to strengthen their most important asset, their people. Over the course of her career, Lisa has presented to hundreds of organizations, staff, and leadership teams, covering all things talent management for the social sector. Lisa has inspired nonprofit HR to become a force that thousands of nonprofit and talent management leaders look to for consulting services, thought partnership, sector-specific hiring, and executive search needs. Also, professional development and information. Without further ado, you'll now hear from Lisa Brown Alexander.
Thanks so much, Atoka. I'm glad to be here today. Good afternoon to everyone, wherever you may be. Hope that you're doing well. Before we jump into today's session, just wanted to quickly reintroduce ourselves to some and introduce ourselves to others about who nonprofit HR really is. So we are a total lifecycle solutions firm that works exclusively with the social impact sector. That includes foundations, social service organizations, associations, and social enterprise. We have served thousands of missions since our inception in 2000 and have a national footprint from coast to coast, California to Maine, as well as employees in many, many locations across the country. We're thrilled to be here today. This is our first webinar of 2021, and we're looking forward to jumping into the data that we've put together as a result of hosting our Talent Management Priorities Survey. So let's get started. The Nonprofit Talent Management Priorities Survey. It was originated by our firm, Nonprofit HR. This year we had some 423 organizations participate, representing a wide range of missions, locations, and budget sizes. We were not going to get too much into demographics today in the interest of time, but when you receive a copy of the survey and the survey report, that information will be made available to you at that time. Next slide. All right, let's get started. We've got a lot to dig into. So because this is a recurring survey, we make it our business to share with you both the current data and then the previous year's data as a way of understanding where things are trending, changes that have been made. And so one of the most important questions we ask survey participants is to understand where they are with respect to having a formal talent management strategy. This year we asked that question, does your organization have one? Yes, no, or I don't know. And 28% said yes, they do. 63% said no, and 9% said they don't know. If you look down on your screen, you'll see that our 2020 results are there. And there's not a huge difference in whether or not organizations have a talent management strategy. It's a little disappointing. We're hoping to see a sizable increase each year, but we know that the vast majority of nonprofits are operating without having a formal talent management strategy in place. Of those who responded to the survey, what we heard was that other top talent management priorities, whether or not they have a strategy, a formal strategy or not, culture continues to dominate the landscape of priorities among nonprofit organizations, culture and engagement. So you'll note that this year, 77% of organizations prioritize culture and engagement as their leading talent management priority, compared with 74% last year. Learning and development takes the second spot for this year, compared with talent acquisition in 2020. And then our third priority remains performance management. Very little difference between those 2 years. So just kind of top line information for you to get a sense for where the major priorities are falling. We're going to spend some time delving into each of these areas as we go through today's session. Next slide. So we asked the question around 3 areas included in your talent management strategy. And this was only answered by those that have one, of course. If you're contemplating creating a talent management strategy for your organization, if you're in that group of organizations without one, what we heard was that there are certain elements that are most commonly found in talent management strategies among nonprofits. The first is the learning and development plan for staff, and that includes staff development, leadership development, mentoring, shadowing, all kinds of learning platforms. That always finds its way, or at least 76% of the time finds its way into a talent management strategy. Diversity, equity, and inclusion got bumped up a little bit, and we see that as being a predominant element of talent management strategies, followed by retention planning. So as you think through your organization's plan and strategies for 2021, you will want to be sure that they include at least these elements if you want to be competitive with your colleagues across the way, across the road or across town or even across state. In terms of obstacles that impede talent management priorities, they're common and they're the same. They have not changed at all from 2020 to 2021. The biggest obstacle for organizations realizing their priorities is not having enough staff. This is a long-term challenge for nonprofit organizations of all kinds of size, but certainly the small to mid-sized organizations are often challenged with having enough people to do more than just keep the trains running. And so what we heard was not having enough staff is the major impediment to realizing talent management priorities in 2021, same as last year. In terms of the elements that are included in talent or were included in talent management strategies among organizations last year, you'll notice that talent acquisition was at the top of the list. And if we reflect back on 2019, we know that the labor market was getting very tight, right? And so talent acquisition, was a kind of top of mind for many, many organizations and found its way into their strategies. That's changed. We're still looking at retention, but TA is not the top anymore. It's keeping people and ensuring that they learn while they're with us. So just a couple of highlights there. Next slide. So we asked the question of organizations that have a talent management strategy, what will guide their work in what guided their work in 2020? And what we heard was that 65% said, you know what, we don't have one, it's not guiding our work, and we're kind of just planning our talent management practices in another way, but absent of a formal strategy. So that's just a look back at last year. What's interesting, before we go away from that slide, is that there are 8% of people who completed this survey, and most of the folks who completed this survey are HR leaders or organizational leaders. 8% didn't know if their organization had a talent management strategy, which is a little concerning. All right, next slide. So we're going to take a deep dive now into talent acquisition and the findings that came out of the survey, and then we're going to share some insights and observations that we hope you'll find useful. Let's dig in. All right, so we're talking about the top 3 priorities from a talent acquisition perspective. This is what we heard from organizations this year about their top priorities. Attracting and hiring diverse talent remains a very high priority for many nonprofit organizations. And when we talk about diverse talent, we're not just talking about race, but also age, gender, identity, and differing abilities. So that's the leading talent acquisition priority for 2021, followed by strengthening internal capacity around interviewing skills and practices. So making sure that the people who are involved in the hiring process actually know what they're doing, ensuring that they're effective in their interviewing skills in a way that will realize results. And then the third priority for this year was implementing initiatives to increase candidate engagement. So many of you are familiar with the phrase or the term the candidate experience. What does that mean? That refers to what happened, what organizations individuals experience when they apply for a position in your organization, and making sure that the candidate experience and candidate engagement is enhanced is the third leading priority. All right. And you'll note last year, same priority, right? So hiring and attracting diverse talent, although less of a number last year, was still the top priority. The issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to come up over and over again through today's presentation. And really, as we talk about talent management more broadly, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for some organizations that are further along the spectrum has really become a critical part of their organization's talent management practices. And we'll delve into that in a little bit more detail. Next slide. So why does this matter? What does it mean for your organization? Well, first and foremost, attracting and hiring diverse talent matters. And why does it matter? It matters because the results or the impact of having a diverse staff, it improves your workflows, it improves your programming, the quality of the services you provide to the community, and it also fosters innovation. So we know about the kind of the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it continues to matter among nonprofits. And as you saw from the data from 2020 to 2021, the extent to which hiring and attracting diverse talent has gone up by 10%. So that's where we're seeing major improvements, major kind of advancements among the sector. We also know that hiring diverse talent is good, but it's not good enough, right? So diversity is important, but equally important is inclusion and belonging. We don't have time to delve into that today, but as you think through hiring diverse talent, it's critically important to assess your organization's kind of equity index and inclusion index, the extent to which when employees that are different from the vast majority of your staff, when they come into your organization, do they feel welcome? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they can make an equal contribution? That's really, really critical. We also know that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, political unrest, and renewed calls for social justice have really caused a lot of organizations to rethink their talent acquisition strategies and practices. Many organizations are looking more to buy versus build talent. And why is that? Because there's so much more talent available. In periods of a tight labor market, we see organizations invest more deeply in the talent that they have with the goal of growing them and reskilling and upskilling the existing talent. But when the labor pool frees up a little bit more and there's a need for kind of quick adaptability and flexibility, buying talent from the marketplace can be an equally effective strategy. We also know that improvements in hiring results are going to continue to be driven by the interviewing effectiveness of those involved. If you have staff, leaders, participants in the interview process who are not skilled at interviewing, that can absolutely and negatively impact the quality of the hires that you're able to bring on board. So we emphasize and encourage organizations to really spend time helping interviewers be ready, understand the process, address their own biases as a way of improving talent acquisition results. We also encourage you to define your talent acquisition outreach by who you have and who you need. What does that mean? Take a look at the landscape of your existing talent before you go out to the marketplace to understand who you might need, particularly from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, right? If your organization is dominated by women, then you may need some gender diversity. If your organization is dominated by people over the age of 50, you're likely to need some age diversity. And so understanding who you have can inform who you need. Next slide. So as we find ourselves with larger and larger talent pools as a result of high levels of unemployment, don't be of the impression that your hiring speed can slow down. The demand of high quality candidates has not ebbed despite the larger candidate pool, right? So hiring speed and quality of the candidate experience still matter, even though you have a much larger pool of people to choose from than you may have had last year. So keep that in mind. Evaluate how long it takes to move people through your pipeline, at various levels in your organization. Obviously, the more senior the role, the longer it generally will take to bring people in. But if your hiring process is taking 6, 9, 12 months on a regular basis, regardless of level, there's probably something broken in the process that needs to be addressed. So keep in mind that your hiring speed and the quality of the candidate experience still matter. You don't want to find yourself on Glassdoor, the subject of someone's negative experience with your organization. They may not have heard in a timely manner from you. They may not have heard anything at all, forget timeliness, but just at all. Those are the kinds of things that are not forgivable in today's marketplace. So keep that in mind as you think about your talent acquisition strategy and practices. And then finally, and this really came to head out of the Black Lives Matter movement and when it came to a head after the murder of George Floyd, the importance of transparency. It's great that many of your organizations did a hashtag Black Lives Matter as part of your messaging, but your transparency is critical as you put yourself out there to be an employer. And your hashtags and your truth have to equate. All right, so that's really, really important. If you put it out there that Black Lives Matter, the expectation is that if I'm a job seeker looking at your organization, I'm going to expect that your practices reflect that. Whatever hashtag you align yourself to, it's critically important that your work environment and the practices that you have as an organization equate. So with that, I'm going to pause. And Atokatha, Mishka, do we have any questions about talent acquisition before we continue?
Hi, Lisa. Not yet. We can just keep moving.
All right, we'll keep moving. Let's shift to talk about culture and engagement, one of my favorite areas. I really think culture is critical to organizational success. And let's just talk about the findings from the survey from this year, and then we'll share a few insights. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. All right. So top 3 priorities regarding culture and engagement from organizations this year were very similar to those of last year. So assessing your organization's culture was at the top of the list for organizations both this year and last year. Difference of 3% between the years. Understanding and assessing your culture is a critical part of any kind of culture strategy. We'll get into that in a second, but I'm glad to see that organizations continue to make this a priority. Second spot this year was building a more inclusive organizational culture, which is different than last year. Same priority, but different rating, right? So 21% listed that as a priority for this year. Last year it was 24%, which is interesting given our greater focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion this year. Small difference, but notable nonetheless. And then finally, improving organizational culture was the third priority identified by nonprofit organizations for 2021. So in terms of insights, what does that mean? Why does this matter to your organization? Let's take a look at our insights. Next slide. So I know we've heard this saying for years and years, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I have a nonprofit twist on that. Culture eats program and service delivery for breakfast. And I say that because oftentimes as nonprofit organizations, and I've worked in one for many years, even though I'm on the consulting side of the house now, many organizations hang their hat, their organizations kind of value on the quality of their programs and the services that they deliver to the communities that they serve. I will argue with you that if your organization's workplace culture is dysfunctional, if it is ineffective, your programs and service delivery will be disproportionately affected. I have worked in this space for many years, and every time we're called into a nonprofit to help them evaluate and assess their culture, there is a direct connection between culture and program quality and service quality. So please know that we cannot disaggregate those two things. It's critically important as we think about our organizations that we understand that there's a tighter culture. Understanding your current culture is the first step to creating a new one. What does that mean? That means that you can't change your culture until you know what the current one looks like. And that information can only come from the people who work in your organization, not just leadership, not just your frontline staff or your community-facing staff, but the totality of your workforce. Why? Because depending on where you sit in your organization, your perspective may be very, very different. Culture is also viewed differently based on age, race, oftentimes, area of work. So understanding your current culture is a really critical and important first step to creating a new one. It's also important for us to move beyond diversity to inclusion, right? So for years, we've focused as a sector on diversity, bringing, different people into our organizations. But when they get there, do they feel welcome? Do they feel included? Are their voices heard? And so when folks' voices are not heard in an organization, it can negatively impact the culture. It can also negatively impact the extent to which employees are engaged. So culture is critically important. We also know that as a result of COVID-19 and the social unrest that we face and the political unrest and all of the stress that is hitting folks, that flexibility is critical for driving organizational culture. If your organization is still kind of old school, holding on to inflexibility as kind of a pillar of strength, you're falling behind. What we're seeing is the most progressive organizations are embracing flexibility in a way that they never have before. And that means everything from allowing employees to work different hours, to changing their schedules to work part-time, to changing the scope of their roles. Flexibility is essential to retention, to building culture, to shoring up your employer brand value, and to driving engagement. So those are just a few things that I wanted to mention with respect to that. In terms of your culture, this whole experience of the last year has also given more voice and more empowerment to employees. And so they're becoming less and less tolerant and less quiet, less willing to be quiet about internal dysfunction and poor communication. So as you think about what's happening in your organization, we can no longer kind of ignore it or hope that it'll go away. What we really need to do is recognize that our employees can kind of turn our organizations on their heads if we don't acknowledge and recognize, and more importantly, address elements of our culture that are dysfunctional and negative and are having an adverse impact on the staff. And it's really, really important. Next slide. So I know this is contrary to what many of us have kind of grown up in this space to understand and appreciate, but we cannot be afraid to take a stand on social justice issues anymore. We're in a different world than we were even 3 years ago. And increasingly, employees, prospective employees, stakeholders are expecting to understand where your organization stands on major social justice issues. Not just issues of race, but of everything from kind of wage equity to gender parity. People want to know. And so we don't have to hide behind our mission statements anymore. It's okay to take a stand on a social justice issue, be clear about it, because people are expecting us to speak up, and our staff are expecting us to speak up. In terms of employee engagement and workforce culture, it really does have a strong influence on your brand as an organization, your reputation, and even stakeholder perceptions. I've said this many times, and I say it often when I speak to groups, that before I make a donation to a nonprofit organization, I want to see how it treats its people. I want to look beyond the programs and the annual report on the website. I want to take a look. How do you treat the people in your organization before I write a check? And so it's really important to understand that increasingly is becoming important to all kinds of stakeholders, board members, donors, funders even. So don't ignore your employee workplace culture. Don't ignore employee engagement. They're critical to the reputation that your organization has beyond its programs. And then finally, as we continue kind of this COVID-19 era that we find ourselves in, it's really important that we understand the critical importance of leadership competencies in the areas of engagement, empathy, and equity. We've got several pieces on this topic alone. We'll share those as part of the post-webinar information that we send out. But those three elements, if your organization, particularly your leadership, is less than strong in these areas, it's a great time to drill down and focus your learning and development and your leadership development efforts in growing engagement, empathy, and equity, particularly with those who are senior in your organization. Folks are expecting it, they need it, they want it, and it can absolutely drive your organization's cultural effectiveness. I'm going to pause there, see if we have any questions. Culture is a big topic.
Not just yet, Lisa. I'm sure they'll start pouring in just a moment.
All right, you're a quiet group. We'll keep going. We've got a lot to cover, so we'll keep going. All right, now we're going to talk about performance management. So let's take a look at the data from this year as compared to last year. Next slide. All right, so this year we continue to hear, much like last year, that the majority of organizations, or at least 40% of organizations, are prioritizing restructuring their existing performance management systems. It's hard to find really dynamic performance management systems. At Nonprofit HR, we actually abandoned our formal performance review process almost 10 years ago. And quite honestly, I don't know that we have lost any steam as a result of that. But what we do know is that 40% of organizations recognize a need to restructure performance management, and that was the same percentage as last year. So increasingly, organizations or at the same level, organizations are recognizing that their performance management systems are not doing what they need them to do. The second priority was implementing training and development initiatives aimed at strengthening manager skills around giving and receiving feedback. We know that the younger a workforce is, the more critically important employee feedback and bidirectional feedback becomes. And so if you look at the demographics of your organization, there's a close alignment between workforce demographics and younger staff wanting more and more feedback. If your managers are not skilled at providing workplace feedback and receiving feedback, that can have an adverse impact on your culture, your retention levels, and your ability to attract new talent. So we really encourage organizations to focus on strengthening manager skills around giving and receiving feedback. And 33% of organizations are making that their priority for 2021. We know that 16% of organizations are also shifting from kind of the traditional event-driven once-a-year performance management model to more continuous feedback models. And that can include everything from meeting on a kind of a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis to eliminating kind of the traditional annual review process. We know that many organizations are moving in that direction. So let's talk a little bit about some insights related to performance management. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, we know that organizations, some are shifting from event-driven performance management processes to continuous feedback models, but it's a slow move. It's a very slow move. We're not seeing much uptick in that over the years, right? So last year was 15%, this year 16%. Not a huge difference in organizations that are moving. I would encourage you, however, to rethink that as your organization grows and evolves from a talent management perspective, to really consider embracing continuous feedback models. There are a slew of them out there for you to contemplate. We help organizations with that, but it's really important to realize that folks want to hear how they're doing more than once a year, right? That's kind of the old model. And so take a look at what you're doing and contemplate what will work for your organization's culture. Out of the COVID-19 experience came an increased emphasis on employee well-being. And what we know is that if your organization has a formal performance management process, that process could be significantly impacted by the well-being of your staff. So if your staff are struggling with childcare and taking care of parents, or if they've suffered a loss in their family as a result of the pandemic, a death, or multiple deaths, we know that that has a direct impact on individual performance. And so we've got to keep that in mind as we think about performance of our employees, right? Resist the urge to decouple the well-being of your staff from their work performance. We know that they're directly connected, and this is the time to maybe break free of some of the tradition that we've had around performance management. Some organizations are suspending them altogether for this year. Others are just taking a different look at how performance management shows up in their organizations and what it looks like and what it means. Is it advancing the ball? Is it moving the needle? And if it's not, then maybe you don't need it, or at least you don't need it in the current form that it exists. So there are just some things to contemplate. That well-being piece, though, is critical to evaluating the efficacy of your current performance management model. The quality of performance feedback also continues to be a key driver in the effectiveness of your performance management program. And so it's really important, as I mentioned earlier, to continue to invest in building coaches out of your people managers, right? Making sure that they have the skills and the ability, the empathy, the equity, the engagement needed to get the best performance out of the talent that you have. Your talent is your biggest investment. We all know that. But that investment needs to be cared for and nurtured. And oftentimes that can happen through bidirectional feedback, right? Not just feedback going from the manager to the employee, but the employee also being able to share. But in order for them to share their feedback, they have to be able to do it with a manager who's ready, who has the skills and the ability to both listen and be a coach and be effective in receiving feedback as much as they are giving it. So just a couple of insights that we wanted to share with respect to performance management. We've got just a couple of others we'd like to share. Next slide. The quality of feedback, as I mentioned, is really important. We also want to encourage you to use performance management to identify gaps that you might need to quickly reskill your organization and to support your workforce restructuring. Many organizations underwent restructuring in 2020 in response to COVID. It caught us all off guard, and many organizations found themselves saying, holy cow, what's going on? We've got to figure out how to do things differently. And folks got moved into new roles quickly, sometimes without a lot of planning. But if you are still engaging in a structured performance management process, I would encourage you to use that process to understand better about the opportunities that exist for reskilling, upskilling, and shifting skills within your organization to respond to needs as they arise. And so being able to do that is a great way to support organizational transformation. And many organizations are having to transform and reinvent themselves as the world around us just kind of swirls out of control. When we think about skills, the skills that are critical to evaluate and understand and grow, there are 4 critical skills that I want to just highlight: collaboration, resilience, adaptability, and self or time management. If we can teach and grow those skills within our organizations, we can withstand the changes that happen as a result of changing external factors and sometimes even internal factors. But collaboration, resilience, adaptability or flexibility or agility, however you like to refer to that term, and self/time management are critical, universal, must-have skills for every workforce, every nonprofit organization in today's world. I'm going to pause once again to see if we have any questions related to performance.
Yeah, Lisa, lots of questions have come in. So let's take a few of them now. Yeah, we'll take a few of them now, and then we'll save some of them if it just starts to take a bit longer than necessary. Then we'll save the rest for later. Here's number 1. I loved how you suggested to us and for us to take a stand on an issue. How does my organization take a stand on an issue that may ruffle some feathers on the staff or board?
So taking a stand doesn't require um, everyone buying in, right? But it's putting a stake in the ground on an issue that really matters to your organization. For example, if you're a health and wellness organization, taking a stand on the critical importance of employee well-being likely aligns with your organization, right? And is not likely to fall outside or be controversial. Conversely, if you're a social justice organization and you can't speak up about kind of social unrest and social injustice happening all around us, then your staff and your leaders, even your stakeholders may begin to question, wait a minute, why not, right? And so if it ruffles feathers, you may not get full consensus among your organization. The bigger issue that I wanted to convey was the importance of being okay with taking a stand on an issue when you believe it's important to your community, whoever your community may be, right? And so it requires a discussion at the board level, at the staff level, at the leadership level in your organization to make sure that there's a general measure of comfort and consensus about taking a stand where you feel it necessary. Our organization, for example, established a stronger diversity, equity, and inclusion statement following the murder of George Floyd. And we did that because we wanted to put a very clear stake in the ground that nonprofit HR stands for equity and inclusion and diversity and belonging. And so we revamped our statements to be stronger as a result of that. And we did not shy away from taking a stand. Your organization might be the same. And so that's my answer to that one. I hope that got you what you needed.
Thanks, Lisa. Here's another one. Does abandoning a formal performance management system impede aligning performance with compensation?
It can. It can. However, my experience is the vast majority of organizations have a very small window to differentiate compensation between those who are underwater and those who are walking on water. What do I mean by that? If you have a spread of 2%, meaning your salary increases are between 2 and 5% or 2 and 4%, the difference between someone getting a 2% increase and getting a 4% increase is fairly nominal. And so if you're relying on your performance management system to identify your highest performers, and your highest performers get a 4%, but your less than high performers are getting 3%, then your performance management system really isn't informing your compensation strategy. It's a nominal difference and one that most organizations are locked into because there are limits that organizations can have to really implement a true pay for performance system, which significantly differentiates what kind of mediocre performers get versus high performers. So I don't think abandoning the performance management process negates that. It does require trust and communication to make salary decisions on something other than a performance rating. We'll take one more.
All right, one more. So many senior managers believe they do the feedback thing very well, empathy, coaching, all of those things, but they don't. How do we get them to buy into being trained?
I'm going to have you repeat that one more time.
Let me see if I can make this a bit more succinct. So many senior managers believe they do the feedback, empathy, coaching thing very well, but they don't. Mm-hmm. How do we get them to buy into being trained?
Ask the employees who are getting the feedback how effective the feedback is. And that will speak volumes, right? Simple question. How effective is the performance feedback you're getting from your manager? And if they say on a scale from 1 to 10, 2, that tells you that your leaders need some training. And take that data and put it right in front of them. Ask the people who are receiving the feedback if it's helping them, if it's helping to advance their performance. And if they say no, then that's the data that your leaders need to see in order to buy into investing and committing to improving their skills in that space. I hope that's helpful. All right, let's keep moving. Learning and development. So we asked some key questions in this space. Again, not significant changes from last year, but what we heard was the top 3 priorities are developing a learning and development strategy and program at 36%, 22% expanding their investments and growing and developing teams, and then 15% are prioritizing implementing a staff mentoring program as a way of advancing their learning and development priorities in their organization. Last year, those percentages were essentially the same. 38% last year, 28%, that's a notable difference in expanding and developing and strengthening teams, and then 20% were implementing staff mentoring programs. Now, we suspect that the decrease in strengthening teams this year is happening because we had so many other distractions. And oftentimes when there are kind of really dynamic external factors happening, organizations press pause on their learning and development activity. And so we're guessing, we're making an educated guess that that could be contributing to a decrease in investments around developing and strengthening teams. The 5% differential on mentoring programs, same kind of situation there, right? So we believe that a key contributor to the decrease from last year to this year is because we just had so many other things to contemplate and contend with in 2021 or in 2020, excuse me. And so that's our theory on why we're seeing lesser commitments or less prioritization around that space. Next slide. All right, so we know that work will continue to be done by teams increasingly, and of course, virtual teams and working in a distributed or a virtual remote environment as a team is an added nuance that's really come to the center this year. We know that organizations are many, not all, but many are working virtually. Certainly, if you're an organization that is providing direct service, those services cannot be rendered on a virtual basis. But for those of you who are not in direct care environments, we know that distributed workforces have brought some new challenges, and working as a team in a distributed environment really needs to be mastered, as there is kind of the thought that we might have to remain virtual for the rest of the year. There are different opinions about that, but COVID is not going away anytime soon, and so we need to be mindful of the fact that this may not be a short-term thing, that we will have to help our teams work together more effectively, even though they're in different places and not looking at each other on a regular basis. We also know that learning needs to continue to happen outside of the traditional kind of instructor-led workshop format, right? Or 2-hour class that folks come to. We really need to start embracing more aggressively virtual learning. It's being reshaped and reimagined as virtual work continues through and beyond COVID. So if you have kind of pressed pause on your training activities and your learning and development activities within your organization because you're not together, I would encourage you to rethink that. Because we really are likely to have this environment for quite some time. In terms of learning, leadership development and staff development, we see that sometimes organizations lean more heavily, invest more heavily on the leadership side. But I implore you not to neglect the staff development needs that exist within your organization. And we really are encouraging organizations to strike a balance between leadership development and staff development and the investments that you make accordingly. Look at your demographics. What's the percentage of leadership as it relates to the broader workforce? Does your leadership comprise of 10%, 15%, 20%? Then you might consider that to be the level to which you invest in professional development for that segment of your workforce. Conversely, if you're a top-heavy organization and you're largely made up of leaders with very little kind of frontline staff, then greater investments in leadership development might be appropriate. But look at those demographics and make that evaluation. Next slide. We want to encourage you to continue to invest, if you are investing in leadership development, to invest those leadership development dollars in things like change management, crisis management, emotional intelligence, leading diverse teams. These are all issues that are critically important for the workforce of today. I would also go back to those issues of equity, empathy, and engagement, and making sure that those themes and the development of competencies around those three areas get woven into your learning and development strategy for this year. Leaders need those skill sets. They cannot operate effectively in today's environment without having mastery for change management and crisis management, without having the emotional intelligence to deal with the myriad of challenges that our workforces are facing today. And of course, being able to lead diverse teams is increasingly important as our workforces become more diverse. And then finally, as it relates to learning and development, evaluating your learning and development investments against your competency gaps and your workforce demographics is important, right? So look across the landscape of who you have, age, area of work, gender, race, all of the things that make up your workforce to evaluate what your learning and development needs are. And then, of course, all of that needs to be informed by your organization's strategy. Pull that strategic plan out, take it off the shelf, dust it off, get it out of that binder that the consultant may have given you, and really take a closer look at that so you can understand where you need to be from a learning perspective a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and recognizing that the world has changed probably since that strategic plan may have been written. So again, align your L&D efforts with who you have, what you have, and where you want to go. I'm going to pause. Any questions?
We do have one question that's specific to the performance management section. Mm-hmm. And that is, one second, let me just make sure. What are some of your favorite tools written by leaders from historically marginalized groups from building engagement, empathy, and equity? Also, what are some of the best software tools to support progressive continuous performance engagement processes? Can we retire the term performance management?
I'd love to. I would love to. I would love to retire performance management altogether. I've got my own theory on its efficacy. I think sometimes as leaders we can use performance management structures as a crutch, and when you take that crutch away, it forces you to think about how you engage with your staff and share performance feedback in a real-time, non-event driven way. So I've got a very strong opinion about performance management systems. In terms of kind of favorite systems, I try not to make a habit of endorsing systems, but there are many out there that allow and support continuous feedback. And so take a look at them. They're out there. Plop that into your Google search and just put continuous feedback models or software, and a whole slew of things will come up. I will say that if you're contemplating leveraging technology in this space, it's going to be really important to leverage the fact that you're a nonprofit to get preferred pricing. And also, if you're part of an affiliated or federated model, that you check in with your colleagues across your model to find out what they might be using, and leveraging your buying power to do that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but technology. But yeah, there are many systems out there that support ongoing performance feedback. In terms of marginalized communities, I think this really goes back to leadership development and making sure that the leaders that you have in your organization understand how not only to work with, but to coach and mentor people from diverse communities or people who are different from themselves, right? And so it's really important to continue to strengthen management skills in this space, because as our workforce continues to diversify and look different than it does today, having those skill sets are going to be critical to success. All right, let's keep going. We've got a couple other sections to cover.
All right,
let's move on to talk about total rewards. So, what's the skinny in the total reward space? Let's take a look at the data. All right, so when we ask the question about priorities related to total rewards, and when we say total rewards, we're really talking about benefits and compensation practices. What we heard was that benchmarking existing total rewards practices remains the top priority, but it's followed very closely by correcting and addressing pay and benefit inequities. Followed in the third place by expanding benefit programs. Now, you'll notice that the response rate and the prioritization in this area is notably less than some of the other areas of talent management. This year in particular, I think a contributing factor is just the economic instability that many organizations faced in 2020 and even continue to face in 2021. All right, next slide. So we know that the economic crisis related to COVID is driving fewer and fewer organizations to prioritize total rewards, namely compensation, right? When you're in the middle of a crisis, that's not typically the time you think about paying people more or expanding compensation programs, making them, enhancing them. You're in crisis mode. And crises don't often lend themselves to making improvements in compensation. So we're not surprised there. Just wanted to kind of call it out. What we do know is that despite the fact that there's a greater emphasis on kind of social inequity and social justice, fewer organizations are prioritizing correcting inequities this year than last year, right? And again, I think it's, our theory is that it's related to the many crises that organizations are facing, but inequity within organizations, particularly as it relates to compensation, is something that we need to continue to drive toward, right? Closing that gender and racial gap in paid practices does remain a key indicator of your commitments, your organization's commitment to equity. And how can you say that you're an equitable organization and you advocate for equity in the community, but don't practice it internally? And so to the extent that you can, identify where those pay gaps exist, either on a race or a gender basis, identify where they are within your organization. Are they within certain programs or frontline staff versus other staff? Just know where they are, watch for them, and be intentional about trying to address them, even if you have to do it over a series of years. So, it may cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to close the pay gaps that exist within your organization. Doesn't mean you shouldn't begin the process to try to address them. Because if you are standing for equity, then you yourself as an organization need to be equitable. But I do want to just point out one area that we're expecting, and many other kind of thought leaders in the talent management space are flagging for you to watch. And it's around pay gaps related to those who work remotely versus those who return to the office. So as kind of the economy and the workforce kind of warms back up, as more people get vaccinated, we're going to start to see people returning to the workforce, but there'll be a contingent of people who, for a myriad of reasons, will not be able to. And ensuring that we don't create or exacerbate existing pay gaps by those who work remotely versus those who return to the office is really something that we want to bring to top of mind for you, right? So keep that in mind as you think about the pay gaps in your organization. And then finally, benefits expansion, it really remains stagnant. We're not seeing a lot of organizations expand their benefits, largely because of a financial sustainability issue. We will continue to keep an eye on the push for a higher minimum wage. So the raise the wage effort has not died, as many of you know. The Biden administration is behind an increase of the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which I strongly applaud. But we know that that's a huge gap for some organizations, particularly if you're in a lower income community, right? Or you're in a community where the cost of living is lower and the minimum wage at your state level is lower. So we want to continue to push for it. We want to see organizations push to pay livable wages, but we recognize that that's a huge hurdle for many. All right, let's keep going. In terms of employee well-being and flexibility, those will continue to dominate as priorities within the nonprofit workforce going forward. We know that 56% of U.S. companies plan to offer increased access to remote health and remote health benefit options for their employees going forward. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind. Well-being, flexibility, access to telehealth and telemedicine options are going to remain important. We want to continue to push leadership toward empathy in this space and for the need to embrace flexibility as a strategy for not only attracting talent, but retaining talent. In terms of offering mental health support and COVID vaccinations, we're going to see that increasingly become part of a total reward strategy. But with that, we caution organizations to think very carefully about mandating vaccinations for their workplace because the jury's out for many on whether or not they feel comfortable taking those vaccinations. And you'll need to think through your organization's situation and dynamics and culture and values before implementing those kinds of programs. But we are seeing increasingly more organizations support COVID vaccinations as an employee benefit and covering the cost of that. 2020 was a year of survival, and it's likely to continue to be a year of survival. So we're not expecting major developments in the total reward space for very obvious reasons, right? The quote right on screen says it all. We have a total reward strategy. However, we're not implementing anything new due to the financial impact of the pandemic and the impact of minimum wage increases on our organization. That organization is a fairly large nonprofit based out of Missouri, youth development and education organization with more than 500 employees. And they're contemplating this. They're realizing that they've got to kind of push pause on what they're doing with respect to total reward. Any questions? All right, we'll keep going.
Not yet, Lisa. We're good right now.
Okay, we're good. Let's keep going. So we're moving into the talent analytics and metrics space, which I know many organizations have not delved into yet, but let's talk about it nonetheless. So in terms of progress, we know that of those organizations that are prioritizing talent analytics and metrics, 31% of organizations are really implementing metrics for the first time, metrics and metrics reporting. So we know that the sector, the nonprofit sector, is lagging somewhat behind the for-profit sector as it relates to the use of talent metrics. A lot of that is driven by technology. It's very hard to have a robust kind of metric strategy without a strong HRIS or human resources information system or some sort of technology that supports the gathering and reporting of metrics. But of those that are involved or using analytics right now, 25% plan to benchmark in 2021, and 15% plan to expand their reporting of HR and talent metrics in 2021. Last year, that number was a little bit different. We saw that 38% of organizations were implementing metrics, 28% were benchmarking, and 15% were expanding. So a little bit different. It kind of falls along the lines of total rewards. In times of crisis, metrics tend to fall by the wayside. But as it relates to metrics, we know that the current culture is really driving a slowdown in the use and deployment of metrics. Next slide, please. And that really is driving a lot of what's happening on the metrics front. We also know that limited data will continue to create challenges for nonprofits that are seeking to benchmark. Nonprofit HR produces this particular survey and three other major surveys each year as a way of trying to close the gap and provide some meaningful data against which organizations can benchmark themselves. But we know that data are really limited when it comes to nonprofits and their talent management practices. So that can often be a hindrance to what organizations do. We know that there is a greater push for the use of technology and data as a way of driving efficiency in organizations, and that need is particularly pronounced during periods of economic and financial uncertainty, right? And so getting more out of what you have and understanding what you have better is a key part of kind of data collection and metrics and analytics. But if you don't have the technology to do that, then you're obviously at a disadvantage. We also want to encourage, as you think about your metrics, if you're moving into that space, to be sure that whatever you measure aligns directly to your organization's strategic objectives. Measure what matters, right? And if it doesn't matter, don't measure it. You have limited time, you may have limited technology. Really hone in on those things that matter the most. What matters to your organization is what should be measured, and you'll only know that by referring to your strategic priorities at the organizational level. And then finally, reporting on progress and lack of progress for those metrics that you do track is important. Even if you just have 2 or 3 critical metrics like retention and engagement, report on those on a regular basis. Understand the why and not just the what of the numbers, and then be able to provide insights. And if you're not sure how to get those insights out of the data, then reach to people who can help you, consultants, board members, and others who may have more experience in that space. But metrics is more than just a series of number reporting. It's also understanding why the numbers matter to your organization and the implications for change. Next slide. All right, let's talk a little bit. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to mention is going back to the metrics issue, is that DEI data and tracking your metrics around DEI is going to become increasingly important if your organization is taking a strong stand as being a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. So DEI data is really what drives accountability. It's not hashtags. It's not, pictures of diverse people on your website. It's data. And so taking a look at for example, your attrition by demographics, your retention by demographics, performance ratings by demographics, if you're still have a structured performance management process, is really going to be important if you're trying to advance your DEI efforts within your organization. And then, of course, there's a direct link between diversity, equity, inclusion, and performance management. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to go into that, but just think about DEI and if whatever you're doing in this space to have some real tangible metrics to help drive accountability. All right, so now we can jump into our talent-focused technology, and then we'll pause once again to take questions. So in terms of data, we know that 49% of organizations this year are planning to increase their use of talent acquisition technology as their top priority, followed by identifying performance management technology. So that goes back to the question that someone asked earlier. Many organizations are contemplating moving from paper-driven processes to technology or cloud-based systems. And again, there are lots of software applications out there and technology solutions for that. And then the third priority we heard from organizations was that 17% of you plan to implement an LMS or a learning management technology system, learning management system for your organization this year. And we're encouraged to see that because that's a great way to manage learning and development within your organization. Last year, the top priority was also increasing the use of talent acquisition technology, with some 40% of organizations saying that was their top priority last year. And so let's look at some insights related to talent-focused technology. We know that the speed and efficiency continue to drive the need for the implementation for HR technology. Applicant tracking systems, for example, really help drive the improvement in time spent around bringing people into an organization. And as talent pools increase, we have a whole slew of people who are unemployed right now. And if you're not already seeing it, the next time you post a vacancy, you're going to get goo gobs of resumes. And so if you don't have a technology solution to support that, you may find a loss of efficiency in your hiring practice. You may find some challenges around moving people through your pipeline, which ultimately can drive people's perception of you as an employer of choice, right? So it's all kind of connected. Speed and efficiency really continue to drive the need for increased use of HR technology. We also know that many organizations are moving toward AI. Now, we know that many nonprofits are not there yet. We get it, we understand. But to the extent that your existing platforms integrate artificial intelligence technology, you'll want to take advantage of that. Understand what systems you have. Even taking a look at your payroll system. There may be some talent technology available to you that you're not tapping into, but that you're already paying for. So take a look at that and understand the extent to which your current technology vendors are incorporating AI. We know that cloud-based HR tech is enabling our increasingly remote and distributed workforces, right? And so it's important to understand that having some sort of cloud-based platform that's not dependent on a physical location is really the way to go as we move to being a more remote workforce. And then finally, monitoring the urge to track employees and monitor employees online is going to increasingly become a thing, right? So before you decide to implement, kind of employee monitoring software on your computers or your programs, press pause, consult with your attorneys, and make sure you're not putting your organization in jeopardy, because we're going to see more and more lawsuits and more litigation around employee privacy as employees remain at home for prolonged periods of time using sometimes their own equipment, and what that looks like for your organization will differ, but check in with your attorneys before you implement systems and technology and policy around this space. So with that, I'm going to pause, see if we have any questions. I know we covered a lot today. We always want to be sure to make space for questions. And then there are just a couple of other data points we wanted to share as part of today's presentation. Any questions?
Here's one question. Does nonprofit HR have any recommendations on training for senior management and in giving feedback? I recognize this is similar to an earlier question, but this is a second question that came up.
Yeah, we actually do. We work with organizations all the time to help them implement kind of multi-rater feedback systems and continuous feedback models. So we both provide performance management design and strategy support, as well as performance management design from a technology perspective, and have a number of partners that we work with in that space. So performance management is both a systems and a learning thing, right? There are two elements to performance management, is using any technology that might be associated with performance management, and then making sure that the people who are driving the performance management process have the skills needed and the abilities needed to deliver feedback in a positive and productive way. So yeah, we're happy to help. Reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to respond.
Okay, here's a second question, Lisa. Although event-driven performance management is an older model, how do you pivot if that's part of a funder requirement?
Oh, well, if it's part of a funder requirement, then that could be a challenge. But I would say have a conversation with your program manager or your program officer with your funder and understand what exactly they want to accomplish. It may not be that they want you to have a performance management system with ratings. It may be that they just want to know that you have some sort of process in place for capturing, sharing, giving and receiving feedback. So have a conversation with them and understand what their requirements truly are. Now, if they spell them out and say that you need to have a kind of an annual performance review process, then that's a different story. But assuming that they don't say that, then there might be a lot of latitude to shift what you're doing to still meet the funder's needs, but to move away from that kind of annual once a year conversation.
Okay, here's a final question for now.
All right.
Would you consider conversations about skill development, especially core and leadership competencies, to be a separate process from performance evaluations focused on goals and job targets?
Absolutely. One is performance management and the other is learning and development. So yes, I would absolutely disaggregate those two. And if you need to kind of push pause on your performance management system until you identify and define those competencies and then implement some tools and resources to strengthen those, and then go back to your performance management process and make sure that there's alignment between what you're measuring and what's required, I would recommend that. And that's okay if your organization can tolerate a pause in the performance management process. But it is important for there to be alignment between what you're measuring through your performance management system and the competencies that you're requiring of your leadership. What you require should be measured, and conversely, your performance management should be measuring what matters, right? So you want to make sure those things are definitely in alignment with each other. Great question, though. All right, so really quickly, before we wrap up and move to our Q&A session, just wanted to highlight a couple things out of the survey. We can go to the next slide. Great, so we asked the questions this year about the impact of COVID-19 on talent management priorities, and what we heard was that 49% found themselves needing to reduce their operating budgets around talent management as a result of COVID-19. 16% were actually increasing, and then 52% were just reprioritizing their talent management objectives. So that's important to understand the impact of COVID-19 on talent management programs and initiatives. Some even deprioritized, right? I talked about learning and development and performance management being deprioritized, but some organizations deprioritize their entire talent management plan as a result of COVID-19. And so that's an important benchmark for you to have. And then finally, what was interesting is that 22% made absolutely no adjustments at all to any part of their talent management structure, which we found fascinating because so much of what happened in the last year had a direct impact on people and organizations. And so we were a little taken aback by the fact that such a large percentage of organizations made no changes whatsoever to their systems and their practices. But be that as it may, this is the number as it relates to COVID-19. We also took a look at the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement and its rise in the summer of 2020 on talent management. And we asked organizations how many were reducing their operating budgets because of the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. 6% said they were reducing, contrasted against 12% that were increasing their operating budgets and their talent management budgets as a result of that movement. We also heard that organizations were reprioritizing, so not increasing necessarily or reducing, but changing their priorities from a talent management perspective as a result of Black Lives Matter, with the dominating shift being a greater focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Fortunately, we only saw 1% of organizations deprioritize their talent management objectives as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then 29% did nothing at all, right? And from their perspective, race events and social justice events that were at the forefront in 2021 had no impact on how they approached talent management within their organizations. Again, surprising, a little disappointing, but it is what it is. These are the organizations that share their perspective, and we respect that. So 29% of organizations didn't make any change as a result of what happened externally. And then finally, we asked the same set of questions related to the presidential election, which we know took up a lot of oxygen in 2020. And we asked the question if there would be any changes, if their organizations had identified new opportunities or challenges in response to the election. And 76% said no. And so just an interesting factoid, we thought we would share that with you so you would understand how the external events impacted talent management planning in 2020 and 2021. As we wrap up today, I just wanted to just share a couple of kind of key kind of parting thoughts with you. And we'll share the demographic data. We don't have time to do that today, but we'll share that when you get your copy of this report, as well as the full talent management priorities report. But it's important to know where you stand on the talent sustainability spectrum as an organization, right? Because your talent management priorities are going to be shaped by where you are in the spectrum, whether you're talent oblivious, talent aware, or talent focused. Really drives the extent to which your organization not only invests in talent management priorities, but advances those and continues to move them forward. So know where you are. Are you oblivious? Are you aware? Are you focused as an organization on talent and the importance of talent to sustainability? It's also really critical for you to understand your workforce composition as we move into 2021 and beyond, not only for the obvious reasons of understanding the demographic makeup of your organization, but also as you shape your talent acquisition, DEI, and total rewards strategies, right? All of those areas are informed by who is sitting on the bench today, who you expect to sit on the bench tomorrow, and a year from now, 2 years from now. And so as you think about talent acquisition, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and benefits and compensation, you'll want to really have a good handle on who's sitting in your organization. I also want to encourage you to commit and articulate your organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion goals in an open, transparent kind of a way. Increasingly, job seekers want to know, they ask, they check you out for your positions, for your workforce composition, for all the things that matter to them as job seekers. And so commit to DEI if that's what you're doing. Articulate that commitment in a way that's transparent and easily understood. I also want to encourage you to integrate flexibility into your culture to the extent that you can, not only into your culture, but your policies and practices. Flexibility is the magic word for 2021. It was a magic word for 2020. If your organization wasn't flexible, you're likely like in a really bad place right now, right? So we were many of us forced into being flexible and agile last year, and that's not over. So continue to embrace and integrate flexibility into your practices, your talent management practices. And then finally, last but not least, we encourage you to prioritize employee health and employee well-being. As we navigate our way through this pandemic, and as we continue to struggle with political strife and social unrest and the calls for racial justice, that puts a lot of pressure and brings a lot of stress on staff at all levels, really. And so by prioritizing the well-being and the health of your employees, you're not only helping them be sustainable, but you're also helping your mission carry on its important work in the community. And so with that, I will pause, we'll take questions, and hopefully this information has been helpful to you. I've enjoyed presenting it. I think we have a lot to look forward to in 2021 and beyond, and I'm open to questions. Atoka, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Lisa, for all the information you shared this afternoon. And to our listeners and participants, if there are any questions, please type them into the questions box and we will get to as many of them as we can in the remaining moments. We do have some that have come in already, Lisa, and so I'll just start reading off these and we'll get through as many as we can.
All right. Rapid fire.
All right. If your organization prefers not to take a stand on social justice, how do you get them to change their minds?
Like any other talent management practice, taking a stand on social justice issues should be aligned with who you are as an organization, what you say you value. You know, align your stand to your mission. If you are advocating for social justice, then taking a stand publicly should not be a challenge. If you're a healthcare organization, if you're a child welfare organization, there's something you can take a stand on that aligns with who you are. And that's where I would say start from that place of aligning your stand with your mission, your vision, your values. Chances are the resistance there will be less if leadership and boards can see the direct tie between the stand and the issues that you advocate for as an organization.
Okay, here's another. So many nonprofits are in survival mode. How do we link racial equity to the immediate crisis of the pandemic? How might we help leadership teams to look at racial equity as part of the challenge versus a separate issue?
Oh gosh, wow, that is a loaded, loaded question. Um, wow, I'm not even sure where to begin with that. As organizations, as social impact organizations, I shudder to think that organizations don't see where they have a commitment to racial equity. But I recognize that there's kind of a maturity curve there, and that some organizations are further along in their kind of equity journey than others. Um, and so start where you are, start with conversation. Sometimes resistance is because people don't have the language to talk about equity and racial justice. And they need permission to have what oftentimes are very difficult, painful conversations. Our DEI team here at Nonprofit HR works with organizations that are at the beginning, in the middle, and kind of further along in their equity journey, to help them first understand their landscape and where they are as it relates to equity, but then giving them the tools and the language to talk about it. And every movement starts with a conversation and with action. Someone makes a decision to make it a priority, and then the conversation begins. So I would start there. Start with being intentional by gathering, your leadership team and having a frank conversation with them about the need to integrate racial equity into your talent management practices. But that's a heavy question, and I'm not sure I gave the answer justice. But we're happy to talk with you further if there's something we can do to support your organization's racial equity journey.
Here's another question, Lisa. Any thoughts on how the increasing unionization effort in the nonprofit workforce has affected benefits, pay, et cetera?
Yeah. So I struggle with this one, and I've been in this space for like 25 years, and this increase toward unionization, from my experience and my perspective, has come as a result of us not listening as employers. Unions are oftentimes created within organizations when the workforce feels unheard. And so, how is it affecting compensation and benefits? And to some extent, it's forcing an improvement in those compensation plans and practices and benefits. Some organizations, despite having the best of intentions, have failed to be caring and nurturing for the employees who dedicate their time and talent. And so the unionization of the nonprofit workforce is coming as a result of, in some cases, long-term neglect of the workforce. And if folks feel unheard, they will organize. And so I would encourage you as an organization to not neglect the voices and the concerns of your staff. There are many things that organizations can do to stay off the formation of unions within their workforce. And it starts with listening and being responsive. The compensation matter, if your organization is not able to pay livable wages, you may have a plan for getting there. Communicate that plan, commit to that plan, and make incremental progress, or make progress as fast as you can, is probably a better way to say it, so that the staff in your organization understand that you're committed to their well-being, and therefore they will be less inclined to feel like the only way to be heard is to form a union. So from my perspective, unionizations come from organizations that struggle with their culture. They struggle with the balance of employees being heard against organizational priorities. And I know that's probably not the super politically correct response, but I'm giving it to you anyway. That's my perspective, that we really can avoid unionization with a more concerted effort around nurturing cultures that are healthy and productive and not dysfunctional, and that are empathetic and caring. I have never seen an organization with a caring, nurturing, intentional workforce have a unionization drive within it. It just, those two things don't happen. And so your greatest tool in your arsenal is to ensure that your workplace is healthy. from a cultural perspective. I could go on and on about that one, so I'm going to pause and let you ask your next question.
Yeah, we do. We have more questions than I think we'll have the time to get through. So we will definitely follow up with answers to additional questions via email when we send out the results from the survey as well. Here's a question, Lisa. I think we have time to get through two more quick ones. One is, what tools do you use to assess internal skill competency gaps objectively?
Is there a second part to that question? No? Okay.
That was all for that one.
Okay, that was okay. So we generally don't make it a practice to recommend a specific software. So we're not endorsing any particular software for that purpose. But if you'd like to talk to us offline about what your needs are, then we're happy to do that. I shy away from recommending specific tools for organizations, but there are tools out there that will help you assess your skills. If you have a human resources information system, it's likely that you can use some of your existing fields within that system to capture critical skills within your organization and give you at least a baseline for what is and allow you to get to what needs to be. So even before you invest in yet another software program, I would take a look at your existing software. Your payroll system may have a human resources information system in which you can store, collect, and sort through the skills that exist within your workforce.
Thanks, Lisa. Here's a final question. There are so many. There are so many metrics, and I'm familiar with most of them. Considering where we are, COVID-19, remote work, racial justice, political transformation, are there a few metrics that you would recommend tracking to ensure organizational health?
Yeah, there are a couple. And I would say employee engagement, the extent to which your staff feel connected to and engaged with the work of your organization, and then employee retention. Those two right now, to me, are really, really give you a good window into the soul of your organization, right? The extent to which people feel connected to the work, because stress can cause people to disengage and stay in place, which you never want. And then, understanding your turnover data and the extent to which you're able to keep staff in this environment is really key. I think those are two metrics that, if you do nothing else, to measure those. And obviously, another might be the cost of hiring for your organization. If your organization's services are needing to expand, cost per hire is going to be an important number to track as you bring on new staff in response to increased demand from those you serve. So those are just some. There are many, many more. We have several articles on HR metrics that you can find at Nonprofit HR. I hope that's helpful. But thanks so much for joining us, and I hope that our both the data and our answers to the questions that you have been helpful this afternoon. And with that, I will turn it back over to Atoka.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That's all the time we have today for Q&A. Thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. We hope you found it valuable. Thank you again, Lisa, for leading an engaging discussion. Please be sure to complete the survey that will pop up once the webcast has ended. If you'd like more information about Nonprofit HR and our services, please visit us online at nonprofithr.com. You may also email us at info@nonprofithr.com as well. Have a wonderful day.